Welcome to Hard Talk from the BBC World Service with me, Stephen Sackur. My guest in this interview, first broadcast in September 2009, is the best-selling novelist Barbara Taylor Bradford, who has died at the age of 91. Known as the grande dame of blockbusters, her talent for storytelling made her one of the richest women in Britain. Taylor Bradford grew up in a working-class family in Yorkshire. She says she was force-fed books by her mother and had her first story published in a children's magazine at the age of 10. She left school at 15 and became the sole female reporter on the Yorkshire Evening Post. Her first foray into fiction then brought mind-boggling success. The 1979 novel, A Woman of Substance, sold 30 million copies and spawned a TV adaptation, which remains the most-watched programme on Britain's Channel 4. It was the first of 40 novels by Taylor Bradford. I spoke to her 15 years ago to mark the publication of her 25th novel. Her most recent book, The Wonder of It All, was published just last year. She was renowned for her portrayals of strong women overcoming life's slings and arrows. Was she, in the words of her most celebrated work, a woman of substance? Barbara Taylor Bradford, welcome to Hard Talk.
It's nice to be here, Stephen. Thank you.
It's a pleasure to have you. Now, you are still prolific. You've just published your 25th novel, but I'm wondering whether your writing matters as much to you today as it did when you set out.
Oh, absolutely. I don't really have to work ever again if I don't want to. But first of all, what would I do? I've always worked. But writing a novel for me is an adventure. It starts when I write page one, having thought out a smashing story about an unusual woman, and I love it. It does mean the same.
Is it a compulsion? Because I know you said once, you said, I just have to get this stuff out.
Out of my head.
But I mean, you can't have that much stuff left after
I do.
25 books.
I do, actually, Stephen. I have 3 more books to hand in over the next 3 years to HarperCollins, my publisher. I've also got about another 14 ideas in my desk drawer with titles and a general idea, plus a children's series, which I've just developed, of 3 books.
And your books, and I know this from personal experience, your books are not thin. I mean, we're talking hundreds and hundreds of pages, very complex plots. I think you called them family sagas.
Some are family sagas, yes. Some are longer than others, but they're not all family sagas, and I think some people have a misunderstanding. They don't understand that I have written about the Holocaust, about terrorism, and other kinds of stories, as well as the family sagas.
I suppose it is that the family sagas, what made your name,
yes.
At the beginning with A Woman of Substance, and perhaps, still the most popular of your books. And I do want to talk about them a little bit, because I want to delve into the degree to which they mirror your own life. And I do want to ask you, from the very get-go, whether Emma Hart, the central character in A Woman of Substance, and of course the Hart family still going in your work, whether, in a sense, she is what you would have liked to have been as a woman.
Well, yes, I would have liked to have been like Emma, and apparently so would many other women all over the world, because she did become a role model. And I think that's why the book sells today. It's still selling, which has surprised me after 30 years. But I did put a few of my characteristics in Emma, Stephen. She's hardworking and she has good health and stamina. She's determined, she's disciplined, all that sort of stuff. And I'm a bit like that. She
was also brought up in a class-ridden society, a Britain of the masters and the servants.
That's right.
And of course, Emma's fate was to be impregnated by the son of the master of the house in which she worked as a servant girl.
That's true.
You also were brought up in a working class family, and I'm wondering whether you were always aware of the sort of rigidities, of the confines of the British class system, and maybe of gender in Britain at the time you were growing up.
I wasn't then, but I became aware later I think when you're a child and you're happy and you're an only child with devoted parents and somewhat spoiled, as much as they could spoil me with their limited income, I had a happy childhood and I wasn't aware of it. I became aware of it later, yes. And an American reviewer once said, A Woman of Substance was about class differences in England. Nobody else ever said that, but she did.
Did you agree? I mean, is that the way you see it?
Well, I didn't write it as such, but perhaps in the storytelling, which is rather accurate about the period of times that Emma lived in, they came through.
Also, it's about women, and many of your books have these very strong women characters, and your mother, I know from reading about your own history, she was an incredibly strong and ambitious woman, for you more than anything else.
That's right. She always said, I want you to have the life I should have had, or I want you to have a different life than I've had. And she educated me in her own way, you know, force-feeding me culture.
And did that make you, in a sense, rebel against the Britain you found at the time? I mean, we had on this show not so long ago a woman journalist, Anne Leslie, who's one of the leading foreign correspondents of the post-war period.
Yes.
And Anne Leslie described growing up in a town rather similar to yours. You were brought up in West Yorkshire, and going into journalism at a young age, as you did. And she describes how her first boss on this northern newspaper said, you know what, you're keeping a good man out of a job. And another colleague said to her, girlies can't hack it. Did you come across that?
No, I only came across one thing. And I found when I was in the reporter's room at the age of 16, because the editor had taken a liking to me and liked what I'd done some stories on my own. One day, Keith Waterhouse, the late Keith Waterhouse,
just died, but a prolific writer himself.
Yes, he took me to one side because I said, why are some of the men funny? He said, they think you're a spy for the editor. He said, but I told them that you weren't. And that's the only bit of resentment I ever saw, and it went away very quickly. But I never had it again from anybody.
Well, you never had it again, partly because at a fairly young age, you actually got married and then made your home in the United States. And I'm wondering whether leaving Britain was in part a response to, I've used the word rigidities, but the way in which Britain worked at that time in the post-war period.
No, I left because I married an American and he lived in America.
Did you not want to get away?
No, I never thought of it, actually.
No.
I did not see certain things, perhaps because I was not looking for them and was very keeping my eye on the hole in the donut, is the way my husband describes it. I was determined to be a writer and I was determined to go to Fleet Street, which I did. And then at that period of time, I met Bob, and that was going to America after that.
And it took quite a long time from wanting to be a writer to finding success, because you wrote several books that didn't quite happen and never really got published, to be frank about it.
I didn't finish them, you see. I got bored. And I thought, if I'm bored, then the reader's going to be bored, and I got to page 100 or 192. And so I put them away. And one day I had the idea for A Woman of Substance. And I thought, oh, it's not like those other books at all, which had all been suspense. A Woman of Substance was indeed an old-fashioned saga.
It was. And on this idea of a woman, Emma Hart in the story, who, as we've just discussed, comes from these very difficult beginnings. She has an illegitimate child, and then through her own fortitude and talent, she rises. She takes over businesses. She becomes very wealthy. She goes through husbands like you wouldn't believe. And she ends up sort of with a transatlantic business and a vast fortune. Some people have taken that as a feminist message. Do you see it in that way?
I wasn't sending a message, actually. I wanted to write a story about a woman who made it in a man's world when women were not doing that. And when I was thinking it out, I thought, I want to write about a woman who becomes a woman of substance. And as I said, I wasn't sending a message, but I thought she's got to be a businesswoman and successful. And that might have been the 1970s, you know, when I was writing the book, coming over to me.
Well, you published it in the very same year that Margaret Thatcher became Prime Minister in the United Kingdom.
It was a coincidence.
Well, I'm sure it was, but in essence, I suppose I would ask you whether then and now you actually saw yourself as a feminist.
I think I did, but I didn't see myself as a joiner of organisations because I'm rather a loner. You've got to be a loner to be a writer and sit in solitary confinement all day. But I did see myself looking around at my friends who wanted to be movie directors or work in a big business and be the managing director. Women were getting restless in the 70s, and I think Margaret Thatcher just came in and clinched it, and we all thought we could do it.
Has your view of how hard women have to struggle and perhaps some of the institutions and attitudes in society that hold women back and are perhaps unfair to women in many cases, has it changed over the last 30 years, do you think?
I think it has, and for the better. I think women are not as far as they could have gone. They haven't gone as far as they could have gone, but that's not because of the women. I think there are still men out there who honestly don't want women to succeed. There are a lot of men that do. My husband is always rooting for women to succeed in the world of business or film or publishing because he loves women and he sees their talent. But there are people, it's a man's world still, I'm afraid.
See,
yes.
It's interesting, this debate, because another novelist and feminist, sometime feminist, some people dispute that term for her now, but Faye Weldon, whom you may know, she's another prolific writer. She's written recently, or she said recently, in the last 5 years, feminism has been so inward-looking. You know, the feminists, they've been worried about the pay gap, about the minutiae of things in relation to men and women and relationships. And she said it's gone up its own, and she used a rather rude term, for backside in terms of feminism. Do you understand what she's saying, or do you think she's wrong?
I do understand what she's saying, and I don't know that we can generalise like that. I think women are individuals and we can't generalise. I mean, look, I broke a lot of barriers. I didn't break a glass ceiling because I'm not working in the financial end of business, but I've accomplished a lot and I've never had a man hold me back. Even those tough old guys on the Yorkshire Evening Post began to see that I was serious and grew to like me because I was competent and pulled my weight.
Let me ask you about one thing that seems extraordinary to me, and you've never talked about it to any great extent. That is, a biographer was looking into your own family background about 4 years ago, and he came to the conclusion that your mother may well have been the illegitimate child of a relationship between your grandmother and a man remarkably like the story at the beginning of A Woman of Substance. That is, the master of a big house, I believe the second Marquess of Ripon, it may have been. An extraordinary coincidence of real life and your own fiction. Did it make you feel uncomfortable?
It really upset me because he didn't tell me he'd discovered it, and we'd done a lot of meetings together. He'd come to New York, I'd seen him in England. I did have approval, of course, because it was published by HarperCollins, my publisher. I was shocked and I was upset.
Do you think he's right?
I don't know. But it does explain an enormous amount of strange things to me, which he had picked up on when I'd been talking about my growing up and my mother and her taking me always to Studley Royal Deer Park and to Fountains Hall, which is, of course, all the Marquis of Ripon's properties. He, Piers Dudgeon, the author of the book, believes that maybe I knew something. It took me a long time.
Sort of subconsciously?
Yes.
See, what interests me about this is that you've chosen not really to write extensively about it yourself and not to explore it, because it seems to me your own fans, the millions of people who read your books, would be absolutely fascinated to know and perhaps to have more revealed about the interior life of Barbara Taylor Bradford, but you've chosen not to go there. Why?
Well, I never knew consciously about this, even though Piers does not really still believe that. It was never discussed. I said to him, I'm sure if my father had known, he would have told me, especially when I was a grown woman. I didn't really know. I truly didn't. And I think it's a little sort of pretentious, isn't it, to start saying I'm the granddaughter rather, of the Marquis of Ripon, because nobody's had any DNA and everybody's dead. And it happened 100 years ago. I didn't want it in the book, but my husband punctured this when he said, there's no book if you don't have your grandmother's story. I don't know if it's true or not, you see, and I don't know how to find out, because nobody's left.
Let me bring it back to the writing then that you do, and that obviously is the fiction. Do you see yourself as a good writer?
Yes, I think I'm a good popular writer.
Interesting phrasing.
Or commercial writer, if you like.
Yeah, can you be both good in the sense of high literature and art and the serious newspapers and their book reviews? Can you be both a good writer and popular?
I suppose you can, but they don't give me good reviews, those people that you've talked about.
Well, they don't really give you reviews at all. I mean, I've been looking, and very rarely do you get reviewed in what, you know, we'd call the broadsheet or the serious press.
No, I don't, but I am reviewed.
Why do you think that is?
It's snobism. You know, a lot of people criticised Picasso when he was making all those plates, but did it matter that they were by Picasso? I think it is a snobism, and let me tell you one little anecdote. Another journalist interviewing me said, what do you think of critics, Barbara? And I said, well, not much. He said, well, you know, somebody asked Sibelius what he thought of music critics, and he said, nothing. Show me a city where they've erected a statue to one.
I just wonder
and that's my attitude, you
see. Would it go so far as resentment, anger? Because once you said the New York Times gives good reviews to books that don't sell and bad reviews to ones that do.
Yes, I think that's true.
Bitter.
No, it's not bitter. No, I sell books and people invade my website and, you know, 400 to 500,000 clicks a minute almost, all the time. I think the important thing for me is that people read the books, because otherwise I've wasted my time.
But you don't want it to be seen as nothing more than kind of selling widgets, do you? I mean,
but it's not. I think the books are good. They're emotional, they're dramatic, I tell a good story. I put a lot of work into creating characters that the reader is empathetic towards. I think I do a good job, actually. And
I'm interested in the response not just to your work, which is hugely successful, but Dan Brown, for example, who right now is perhaps the biggest selling author in the world. I've just read a review of his latest bestseller from a critic in the UK called Mark Lawson, and he's written, the best-selling novelist in recent history, Dan Brown, is the worst writing. He calls Dan Brown's latest book nothing more than a rollicking piece of tosh. Now, it's probable that he might regard your book as a rollicking piece of tosh,
It might, indeed.
I mean, does that get to you?
If they say it about me or Dan Brown?
Well, obviously, I'm guessing about Mark Lawson's attitude to you, but you know that critics broadly from the high-end newspapers would regard some of your works as pieces of tosh.
Somebody said recently in an interview with me that I had a robust but limited literary talent, and I smiled and said, oh, well, try and do it. Try and do it, and I laugh on the way to the bank, and so does Dan Brown. And all I can say is, good on him, Dan Brown.
What about your portrayal of women? Because it seems to me your core audience is women. I know men read your books, but I think more women read your books. Do you think you portray women in a realistic way?
The women I know, because I know the women I write about, are women that I know in England and New York, and they're very similar. They're hardworking, they have careers, they have husbands, lovers, children, grandchildren, and I think I do.
Are they all beautiful and with steely determination? And to quote, you know, your latest book, Breaking the Rules, we meet M, the heroine,
yes.
and you know, immediately we're told she's exotic looking, she has high cheekbones, she has black brows beautifully arched over large black dark eyes, jet black hair pulled in a ponytail. She's tall, she's slender, she's lithe, she moved with grace and had an inbred elegance. Sounds fabulous.
And she's 23 and she's going to be a top model, so she's not going to be short and ugly, is she?
Well, no, but where are your books about? You know, to be honest, plain and ageing women. Maybe they're not aging terribly well or gracefully. Where couldn't you write about those sorts of women? Because God knows there are plenty of them, and
Well,
men
I
too.
do have some. They're not all beautiful, and the men are not all beautiful. And I have some really rather nasty people in the books. But I do think that people want to read about reasonably attractive people, and you know that as well as I do. You'd prefer to be in a room with pretty women than ugly ones. You know you would.
Yes, let's move on. I want to ask you about the mechanics of writing. From the very beginning of this, you told me that you work hard still and you've got as much stuff in your head that you want to get out as you've ever had. But is there an element that you feel you have to service an audience who knows what they want and want to stick with it, i.e. you're expected to come up with a typical Barbara Taylor Bradford novel and there can be no breaking of the formula?
No, I don't think that at all. And the proof of the pudding is in the eating. I wrote a series called The Ravenscar Dynasty before I did Breaking the Rules. In a nutshell, it was a retelling of the Wars of the Roses from Edward IV to Elizabeth Tudor, but a modern telling because it was set from 1900 to 2004, and it was about the Plantagenet kings and the Tudors. It was a history book in a way, but happening now. I simply borrowed their lives, and the throne of England became de Ravenel's, a great trading house. They dealt in everything. And believe me, everybody was totally surprised.
Were they? Because I'm interested. Did it sell as well as you'd hoped?
Yes, it sold very well.
Because you did say to the Sunday Telegraph 4 years ago, you said, people buy Barbara Taylor Bradford because they know what they're getting. And it struck me as a rather depressing attitude for a writer to have.
I think it might have been taken out of context, that, because what I said is they like to read about strong women and they know they will do so. They're getting a Barbara Taylor Bradford story. But this was a totally different kind. The women were strong in Ravenscar, but they were also set in a different period of time. And the men in this series were the men who really were the protagonists.
Yeah. Final thoughts. You have made yourself a vast fortune and you've got grand homes and fine antiques and all of that.
One home.
All right, but it is rather a lovely one.
Yes.
In New York. I mean, do you have a tremendous satisfaction at what you've achieved? Do you sort of think, I have become a woman of substance?
No. I'm glad that I have success with the books, and of course it's nice to make money. Who would knock that? But I'm not like that. I don't walk. I'm worrying all the time. Is the next book going to work? Or, oh, when will I get down to starting the new one? I'm a bit of a worrier. But I suppose I'm a little bit proud too that I accomplished something with my life and wrote 25 popular novels that people love.
And do you care whether they will love them in the next generation and the one after that? I.e., do you care that they will last?
I'd like them to, but I won't be here, will I? So I won't know. I can't think that far ahead.
Do you think they will?
I don't know. Maybe some. Who knows?
Barbara Taylor Bradford, thanks very much for being on Hard Talk.